Welcome to Inside the Economist's Minds. Australia, the world's second-largest LNG exporter, is grappling with a massive gas paradox. Why are its citizens facing triple-digit price hikes and looming domestic shortfalls? At the center is Santos's Barossa project, greenlit despite being branded one of the most polluting projects in the world, and set to pay no royalties. But the real crisis is the national scandal hidden in the infrastructure. Confidential documents reveal the Darwin LNG plant, which Barossa feeds, has harbored a major long-term methane leak from a 2006 design fault. We examine the shocking evidence that gas companies and regulators allegedly engaged in a cover-up at every conceivable scale to get this potent greenhouse gas leak secret for years, choosing not to repair because it was too expensive. Is this merely poor policy or the true cost of state capture by the fossil fuel industry? Okay, let's really unpack this, because it starts with this fundamental contradiction, doesn't it? Australia, a global gas giant, second biggest LNG exporter.
Huge exporter, yeah.
And yet we're hearing from AEMO, the official operator, that places like Victoria, New South Wales, they might actually run short of gas domestically. Starting, what, 2028, 2029?
That's the forecast. Looming shortfalls in the southern states.
How does that even compute? An export powerhouse worried about its own supply?
Well, it's fascinating because it's not really about the total amount of gas Australia has. There's plenty in the ground overall. The problem is really twofold. One, massive long-term export contracts locking up supply. Two, the geography of it all.
Geography?
Yeah, the old gas fields in the southeast, the ones conveniently located near Melbourne and Sydney, like Gippsland and Cooper Basin, they're running down fast. Output's expected to drop, what was it, something like 36% by 2029.
Okay, so the nearby supply is dwindling.
Exactly, and all the big new reserves are way up in the northwest, thousands of kilometers away.
Right, and piping it all the way south is difficult, expensive.
Hugely expensive, technically complex. So you end up with this disconnect. Loads of gas over here, huge demand down there, and no easy way to connect them efficiently. The southern states are effectively stranded.
Stranded in a country swimming in gas. And the solution being proposed is, well, it sounds kind of nuts, building import terminals.
As many as 4 new LNG import terminals planned for the East Coast by 2027.
So, let me get this straight. We extract the gas, liquefy it at great expense, ship it overseas, and then potentially buy it back, ship it back here, and turn it back into gas.
That's the plan.
Right.
You had one industry observer call it economically insane. And when you look at the costs...
Yeah, tell me about the costs.
Okay, so getting new domestic gas delivered is estimated maybe $9 to $13 a gigajoule, give or take.
Right.
But the spot price for LNG in Asia, which is what we'd likely be buying back, that's been running, $17, $8, sometimes over $21 per gigajoule.
And that's before you even land it here?
Exactly. That's before the cost of regasification, storage, getting it into the local pipes.
So we could potentially be doubling the price for our own industries, our own homes.
That's the projection from some economic analysis, yeah. Frontier Economics suggested imports could double industrial gas costs on the East Coast. It basically sets a much higher price floor for everyone.
Which has got to be why politicians are now talking about forcing exporters to keep some gas here, right? The uncontracted stuff.
Precisely. It shows there isn't a fundamental lack of gas molecules. It's about who gets them and at what price. It's an allocation choice.
A choice that seems to prioritize export profits over domestic affordability.
Well, and maybe that was always part of the plan. The Australia Institute dug up an old Santos statement maybe a decade ago.
What did it say?
Essentially that their big export projects were, and this is a quote, as much about raising the domestic gas price as about gas exports.
Wow. Okay. That certainly puts a different spin on things.
It does. And that leads us directly to the big new project underpinning a lot of this, Barossa.
Right, the Barossa project.
Yeah.
Tied into keeping the Darwin LNG plant going, isn't it? Tell us about it. Huge investment.
Massive. About $5.6 to $5.8 billion. It's a joint venture. Santos has half, then SK-E&S from Korea and JERI from Japan. First gas is slated for third quarter 2025, though there have been some delays.
But it's controversial.
Deeply controversial on 2 main fronts, really, environmental and fiscal.
Okay, let's start with the environmental concerns.
The big one is the CO2 content of the gas itself. It's very high. Much of that carbon dioxide is just vented straight into the atmosphere during processing. It's why people like Andrew Forrest called it one of the most polluting projects in the world.
Venting CO2 directly.
Yeah.
And the fiscal side. You said that's controversial too.
Yeah, this is the part that gets a lot of critics really fired up. Barossa is set to pay precisely 0 royalties to the government.
0. for extracting a national resource.
Zero royalties. And on top of that, it's like all the previous major gas export projects. The Treasury confirms none of them have ever paid the Petroleum Resource Rent Tax, the PRRT.
Hold on. The PRRT is supposed to capture a share of the super profits from these resources, isn't it? How can none of these massive projects have ever paid it?
It's down to how the tax is structured. Companies can deduct enormous exploration and development costs over very long periods. These projects are incredibly capital intensive, so the companies basically argue they haven't made enough rent or super profit yet to trigger the tax, even after decades of exporting.
So they extract billions in resources, but claim the costs mean they haven't made a taxable super profit.
That's the outcome. It led Mark Ogg at the Australia Institute to say, quite bluntly, big gas is taking the piss, extracting the resource essentially tax-free at the federal level.
It's hard to argue when you hear it laid out like that. But Santos must have a counter-argument. They push the economic benefits, right?
Oh, absolutely. They emphasize the reliable energy supply for Asia. And domestically, they point to the Darwin LNG life extension work creating 300 jobs, plus an expected $100 million a year in contracts for Northern Territory businesses.
And there's community funding, too.
Yes, they set up the Barossa Aboriginal Future Fund, committing up to $10 million annually for local indigenous communities. These are tangible benefits they highlight to balance out the criticisms.
Okay, so Barossa feeds into the Darwin LNG plant. And this plant, this is where the story takes another really dark turn, isn't it?
Yeah.
The dirty secret, the leak.
That's right. Inside the Darwin LNG facility, which is, only about 7 kilometers from Darwin City itself, the problem lies with one of the massive LNG storage tanks. Think of it like a giant high-tech thermos or esky.
And the problem started right at the beginning.
Way back. Commissioning in 2006, apparently there was a design fault with some internal nozzles inside the tank. When they loaded the first batch of super-cooled LNG, disaster.
What happened?
It seems the LNG overflowed or sprayed incorrectly. It went onto the tank roof and, crucially, got into the space between the inner tank holding the LNG and the outer protective wall.
That space is supposed to be sealed, insulated, right?
Exactly. It's got this fiberglass insulation blanket, but the LNG, which is incredibly cold, minus 160 degrees Celsius or so, soaked into that blanket.
And an outer wall couldn't handle that cold.
No, it was made of carbon steel, not designed for those cryogenic temperatures. The extreme cold caused massive thermal stress, and the weld seams on that outer wall just cracked.
So the outer barrier failed.
It failed. And that broken barrier created pathways for methane gas, which boils off the LNG to escape. It went up into the atmosphere and apparently also down into the ground. Locals later reported seeing gas bubbling up in the mud nearby, a fundamental design flaw leaking from day one.
Leaking methane. And we know methane is a seriously potent greenhouse gas.
Hugely potent, responsible for about a quarter of current global warming. Over shorter time frames, like 20 years, it traps maybe 80 times more heat than CO2.
So for years, this broken tank was just venting this stuff. How much are we talking about? Did they even know?
Well, for a long time, it seems routine checks didn't pick up the scale of it. It wasn't until September 2019 that the operator at the time, ConocoPhillips, used new drone technology.
Drones?
Yeah, specialized drones that can detect gas leaks. And they found what they termed an unexpected leak. Unexpectedly large.
How large?
At its peak measurement, it was releasing up to 184 kilograms of methane per hour.
Per hour? That sounds enormous.
It is. Some internal estimates suggested that over the 14 years it was operating and leaking, it might have averaged around 95 kilograms per hour.
Just put that in context for us. 95 kilos an hour.
Okay, so that average leak rate over a year, it's roughly equivalent to the annual emissions of adding more than 8,000 brand new cars to the road every single year.
For 14 years. From one faulty tank.
And critically, measurements showed the leak rate was about 5 times the accepted industry standard for these kinds of fugitive emissions. Some critics calculated this single leak could have been responsible for maybe 25% of the entire Darwin LNG plant's emissions.
A massive, unacknowledged source of pollution. But the timing of when they disclosed this, that's where it gets really suspect, isn't it?
Exactly. This is what turns it from just an industrial accident into what critics call a potential cover-up. They found the scale of the leak in September 2019.
But they didn't report it immediately. I thought there were rules about that.
There are. A 24-hour reporting requirement for major incidents. But they waited for 8 months.
8 months? What happened during those 8 months?
2 very significant things. First, the Northern Territory regulator, the NTEPA, granted conditional approval for the Darwin LNG plant's life to be extended all the way out to 2050. The disclosure about the massive leak happened hours after that approval came through.
Hours after. Wow. And the second thing,
The plant was in the process of being sold. Santos announced its takeover deal from ConocoPhillips in October 2019, right in the middle of this non-disclosure period.
so secure the plant's long-term future, get the sale process underway, then mention the giant 14-year-old leak.
That's certainly how the timing looks. And initially, the concern wasn't just environmental. Government officials were apparently worried about safety.
An explosion risk, with Darwin so close.
That was the fear raised internally, yes. Risk to Darwin, just 7 kilometers away, and Palmerston, 11 kilometers. Documents show ConocoPhillips argued against telling the public, saying only site personnel were affected. The regulator apparently had to push hard, even threatening to go to the workplace safety body before the company finally notified them.
Unbelievable. No wonder the Environment Center NT called it a national scandal and alleged a cover-up at every conceivable scale.
It certainly paints a picture of information being tightly controlled during critical moments, raises serious questions about transparency and regulatory capture, as some critics frame it.
Okay, so fast forward. Santos now owns the plant. The Barossa gas isn't flowing yet. The project's delayed until 2025. That tank, the leaky one, it's sitting empty right now, isn't it?
That's correct. It's empty, waiting for the new gas supply.
So, this seems like the absolute perfect opportunity to finally go in and fix the damn thing, right? It's been broken since 2006. Why isn't it being repaired?
Well, this is possibly the most illuminating part of the whole saga. Santos made a deliberate decision not to repair or replace the faulty tank.
They decided not to fix a known, major, decade-and-a-half-old leak. Why on earth not?
They stated in their environmental plans that essentially the cost was too high. Their exact wording was that the cost associated with the installation and maintenance of additional instrumentation is disproportionate when compared to the plant's other expected processing emissions once Barossa starts up.
Let me process that. They know the tank is structurally flawed and leaks massively. But because fixing it costs too much relative to the pollution they plan to make anyway, they're just leaving it broken.
That appears to be the commercial decision they reached.
Yes, and the regulator, TNTPA, they just accepted that.
They classified the repair decision as a commercial decision for Santos. Essentially, they accepted the company's justification that it wasn't worth the cost to fix the existing fault.
So a known environmental hazard, a major source of greenhouse gases, its repair is just a commercial choice, not a regulatory requirement.
That's how it played out. And it highlights this issue of fragmented regulation. You have the offshore regulator, not SEMA, saying onshore risks are for the NT authorities.
And then the NT authority, NTPA, accepts the commercial decision and seems to defer the reporting of methane emissions to the federal level.
Right. To the Clean Energy Regulator, which oversees the National Greenhouse and Energy Reporting Scheme, or NGERS. And this is where another problem lies.
What's wrong with the reporting scheme?
Rod Sims, the former head of the ACCC, the competition watchdog, pointed out a key flaw. NGERS allows companies like Santos to report their emissions based on estimated figures using standard default calculation methods.
Default methods, not actual measurements from the leaking tank.
Exactly. These default formulas are designed for standard equipment operating normally. They aren't designed to account for a specific, known, major structural failure like a cracked tank that's been leaking for years.
So they can use a standard formula, report a number that looks compliant on paper,
while completely masking the reality of the emissions pouring out of that specific known fault. It highlights a massive gap in mandatory, verified, actual measurement, especially when problems are known.
It feels like a system designed to allow problems to slip through the cracks.
That's certainly the critique. That the combination of tax loopholes, secrecy around failures like this leak, the commercial decision justification for not fixing things, and flawed reporting mechanisms, it all points toward the system that critics argue is captured, or at least heavily skewed, towards industry convenience over public or environmental interest.
So let's just recap this whole picture. Australia, a top LNG exporter facing domestic shortages and planning costly imports. Driving this is the Barossa project, highly polluting, paying no royalties or PRRT.
Which feeds the Darwin LNG plant.
Which, we now know, had a massive methane leak from a design fault for 14 years. A leak kept secret during crucial approval and sale periods.
A leak that the current owner, Santos, has decided not to fix, even with the tank empty, because it's too expensive relative to future pollution.
And this all happens within a regulatory system where responsibility gets passed around,
Hmm.
and the final reporting can rely on estimates that don't reflect the known reality of the broken equipment.
It's quite the chain of events. You see these wildly different numbers about the leak scale. You see regulators deferring to each other. You see commercial interests trumping environmental repair. Look, gas has a role in the energy transition currently, that's clear. But if the governance around it allows for this level of opacity, relies on companies choosing whether to fix major known faults based on cost, how can anyone, consumers or policymakers, really trust the environmental accounting or the cost structures?
It fundamentally undermines trust, doesn't it?
It does, because who ultimately pays the price for a leak that's too expensive for a multi-billion-dollar company to fix? Is it the environment? Is it Australians paying higher domestic prices?
It really leaves you wondering, thinking about all this. It raises a pretty fundamental question for the future, doesn't it?
I think it does. Should the right for companies to export Australia's natural resources, like gas, be strictly conditional? Conditional on mandatory, verified, real-time emissions measurement, and perhaps more importantly, on the immediate repair of known major environmental faults like this one, regardless of whether it's deemed commercially disproportionate.
Something definitely for all of us to consider as these energy debates continue.